Good morning or afternoon or evening, depending on when you're watching this. I am Lucy. I'm Associate Director of Border Crossings and I lead on the community engagement and education work. And today I'm sat with Michael Walling, our Artist Director and founder of Border Crossings, and we're going to be talking about our devising methodology. Good morning, Michael.
Morning, afternoon, evening, according to when they're watching it. Yes, hello. Hello, that's more open,
It
isn't
is.
it?
Hello is very open.
Yeah.
I joined the company in 2012,
hmm
and obviously the company's been around for 30 years. When did we actually start doing devising work?
The first one was Mappamundi, which we developed, researched and developed during 1999, and the first performances were in 2000. It was about the millennium, so it was done very specifically to hit that
Wow.
crucial date.
So a long time.
26 years, I would say.
So devising is one of those things that, I mean, it's in a lot of curriculums, a lot of people are interested in devising work, but it always feels like a big thing. So where do you start when you want to create a new piece?
With a hunch.
Okay.
Um, and the hunch can come from all sorts of different places, but Mappamundi was a very interesting one because we knew the millennium was coming. The company had existed for 4 years, so we kind of knew it was about cross-cultural dialogue and internationalism. So that was a hunch. And then I also knew I wanted to start the piece in Hereford because that's where I started, and it's also where I knew there was a theatre which was up for co-producing it with us. So, sometimes these things are practical. And I thought, well, what on earth can make something about the whole world have anything at all to do with Hereford, which is a little market town on the edge of England and Wales? And of course, the answer was that it had the Mappamundi, which is a medieval world map, which also attempts to encompass the whole world, but did it in 1300 or something when the world was thought of very differently. And so we thought, well, that might be a way of beginning to look at what the world actually is about at this milestone of the year 2000. So it's a hunch, or with the Great Experiment much more recently. My wife and I went back to Mauritius, which is where she's from originally, and we visited Mauritius's World Heritage Site, the Apravasi Ghat, which is where indentured labourers who came from India to work the sugarcane fields there, it's where they all landed, and they were all photographed, and it was the most extraordinary museum. And again, the hunch was there might be a play in this. And that's kind of it to begin with.
So in terms of students thinking about where to start, kind of, are you sort of suggesting that they just go with something that's playing around in their head or that they're interested in exploring?
Yeah, I mean, think about why it's playing around in your head. Why on earth has that become so interesting to you? And then that'll probably set things moving. Yes.
So how long does preparation take in terms of all this thinking before you get to that rehearsal stage? Like, what do you need to do to be ready for the first day of rehearsal or to be ready to start making the play?
Yeah. I mean, it can literally be years and years and years. I'm trying to think of some examples. I can't. But it can be a really long time. For students, that's not going to happen.
I mean, the Great
what you do,
Experiment, for example, I can remember the rehearsal room just being packed with resources and things. You'd
yeah.
clearly done a lot of research.
Well, I had, but also we had professional researchers involved,
Yes.
which was a coincidence, but then gets added to the hunch, and you start to see, okay, so these are some of the people who need to be in the room. And I think that is the biggest question of them all. Who do you bring in? Because you've got the resource of this is the idea, you research that, you pile in lots of things which are to do with that research, but who needs to be there in order to tell the story that you might find you want to tell? That becomes really important. And for the Great Experiment, well, there certainly had to be people from Mauritius. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, the only reason to tell this story in England now is because it affects us too.
And I guess for students, you're often, certainly in the UK, naturally in very diverse backgrounds.
Yeah.
So actually the strength in creating a devised student piece is the strength of those people and kind of thinking about who are we?
Yeah. Yes. The difference is, of course, when you're 16 or whatever age you are, um, who are we is less defined. People sort of find who they are around about the age of 30, I think. Most people tend to have landed by then. But I think there's something very exciting about being young and being engaged in a process which is in many ways to do with who you are. Because actually, theatre is an experiment with who you are. You perform somebody, you're finding somebody, and that somebody is in some ways you, but you can play with alternatives.
Depending again, when we're devising work or thinking of hunches, we have a whole process of having to apply for funding, about gathering partners. So we've done a certain process. I guess for student devising processes, you have a fixed amount of time, you've got a fixed group. So
Well,
any kind of,
well, it could kind of go the other way round, couldn't
yeah,
it? I've got these people,
yeah.
that's who I'm stuck with. Therefore, what might this process be? Because I've got Ethel, that means it can't possibly be about Aboriginal Australia because, Ethel and Fred and so none of those are Aboriginal Australians. It could be about how the people who they are view Aboriginal Australia, but that's a very different thing. So I think you do need to think in terms of the resources and the human resources, and that is to do with cultural background, it's to do with things like gender, but it's also to do with personality, and different types of energy. And, some people can be quite quiet and think a lot, and other people can bounce around and jump about a bit. And how those different energies will play out when you're working together, I think is actually really, really crucial. You have to have balances. Yeah.
And do you have specific exercises or techniques you like to use in like the first day or first week when you've got that room of people with different energies and personalities?
Well, again, it depends a little bit on the particular circumstances, and whether they know each other or not. Now, in an education setting, they almost certainly will. So you don't need to do name games and who we all are. Although a bit of who we all are can actually be really interesting when you think you know each other, because certainly I found this with drama school groups. Very often, if you do an exercise around someone's personal story, you find that they tell things that nobody knew. And a very good one is if you have a sense of what the theme of the emerging piece might be, not necessarily theme, but some of the feel of it, that you get everyone to tell a very personal story to one other person. And say the piece might in some way be about fear. Tell a story about when you were afraid. The other person then tells that story back to the group, but tells it as if it was their own. And well, you've done this. You told a story to a much older American man. And the idea was that he then told the story back to the group, but made it as if it was something that happened to a much older American man, so it could be his own. So you keep the personal truth, the emotional truth, but it's theatricalized, it's performed, and people start to see how who they are actually affects material. And it becomes then common property. Without losing its kernel of truth. And that can be a really valuable thing to start from. And I can think of several times when a story told in that way has ended up in the play.
And actually for student groups, sometimes we think we have to go with a big theme and big research, and actually the resource sounds like it could be with those people in the room and playing
Always
around.
is.
Yeah.
And then there are other things too.
Yeah.
But the people in the room are always the most important resource.
And I think we often can forget that because you don't find yourself interesting, but other people do. And that, I guess that exercise shows that as well.
Yes, very much so, yeah.
So what's your role in the rehearsal room when you've got all these people and the actors are obviously devising? As a director, it's very different than script work, isn't it, if you're leading? devising work, or is it?
Well, I mean, in some ways, yes, but I don't think it's as different as it might appear, because I think, a director's job is to provide a direction, uh, which I guess is the hunch we started from. You say,
Yeah.
okay, this is the thing we're going to look at, and then see how the group does when it's pushed in that direction. And a constant sort of oiling of the wheels is important. And in the early stages, these kinds of exercises, like we just talked about, are useful. But I think as time goes by, it becomes more and more just about asking questions which enable people to imagine how the play itself might go. And so it looks like we might need a scene in which something like this is going on. Do you two want to go off and work on that? And then maybe you could think about the scene that could come after that if so it's that kind of thing. Or we're going to need a dance. Anyone got any music? Yeah,
Yeah.
so it really is just opening up constantly where we might go next, and then responding to that. Because sometimes people come up with something and you think, oh, no, that's no good. And sometimes people come up with something and you think, that's really interesting, but it would be better if this happened. And so just in it a bit becomes, I think that is the director's job, because you're watching. No, the people who are in it can't watch it, but I can. So I can say, I think we should take it a bit more this way. Well, sometimes it becomes, just come in and try the scene as if it's that, and suddenly it's something different. So making connections,
So it sounds like it's quite a playful approach.
completely. Yeah.
But actually, I guess some things you're saying, and I guess for students as well, it's about trying things out, it's about experimenting.
Yeah.
And then when you've got something, maybe asking some questions like what could happen next, what could
Yeah.
happen before,
Yeah.
and then things start, and what's missing
Yes.
can then help build things. I think it's about trying something. You don't have to think it's the whole thing and big at the
You
beginning.
mustn't think it's the whole thing. I mean, this is a
Yeah.
mistake which people often make, including professional actors.
Yeah.
We saw it happen 2 weeks ago, didn't
Yeah.
we? Where people want to do the whole play all at once. And no, find the building blocks. Find things which are truthful, meaningful, funny, sad. And eventually, after you've got lots and lots of those, you can start shifting them into a narrative, whatever that may mean, into a whole. And that is, of course, the other thing where the director's view becomes very important.
And so, how many weeks do you rehearse? And how do you because we're talking about this sort of finding these little specks of gold, really, within the rehearsal
So do
period,
you
building it up.
mean-
But how do we? How long do you have? How do you kind of shape the piece? Is there a kind of process over certain weeks? How does that happen?
Do you mean in an ideal world, or do you mean in the real world? You probably mean the real world.
I think our real world, really. We're talking about our work.
Well, what we always try to do is to have a period which is the research and development period, which is not just before the show. So, and it can be several years before the show, because that's how long things can take, but that's usually a month. And, 5, maybe even 5.5 days a week, working hours, 10 till 6. And then you go away and you think about it, and you find the theatre, and you find some more money, and then there's another month, which is the period of rehearsal building up to the actual performances. And that makes it sound like you make the whole show and then there's the gap and then you just rehearse it. That isn't what happens. You carry on devising afterwards in the main rehearsal period. But overall, it's about 2 months of concentrated time. But it's also very important that you have the gap, because it allows things to sink in and people to feel differently. And I become less precious about it, because, at the end of the first 4 weeks, I'll have thought, oh, we've done something marvelous. Oh, it's all so good. Yes. and then I can go away and think, actually, we need to rework that bit, and so on.
And do you usually kind of film the process so you can
Yes,
look back? Is that
yes,
helpful?
yes. And nowadays, I've started to find you can actually do a transcript, and it's really useful making a script. I mean, you don't do it word for word, but it's a really good structure to start from.
Yeah, and I guess so. Obviously, students don't necessarily have that luxury of 4 week rehearsal period of
Mm.
break, but actually, I guess it's about structuring the time they have
Yeah,
so that you allow that time where the group is researching and being
yeah,
playful, let the ideas emerge,
yeah.
and then create. We've said then sort of experiment and play, create something.
Mm.
So, any advice when they sort of start sort of getting these little short
Mm.
scenes, how to turn that into a full production?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great thing which we've done on a lot of the shows, not all of them, but a lot of them, where you do a what have we got with a whole load of post-it notes and just write down this scene, that scene, this scene, that scene, and then you put them all on the table and you start putting them next to each other and seeing what emerges.
Mm.
Um, and it, and then you have that up on the wall as a sort of guide to memory as you start rehearsing it. But then you can do things like just move one. Um, there was an extraordinary thing that happened on the Great Experiment. It actually happened in between the development period and the rehearsal period, where the very one of the very last scenes became the very first scene,
Mm.
and then it made an enormous difference.
How?
Well, because if it was towards the end, it was, oh, here we are still thinking about the same stuff we've been thinking about through the play. Whereas at the beginning, it was, oh,
Mm.
okay, that's where this is going. That wasn't what I expected when I saw the advert.
So I guess it's keeping that open mind as
Yes.
well, that just because you've done something that seems to have worked,
Mm.
it doesn't mean it needs to stay there or stay in that form, and sometimes trying things in other ways where it can maybe help you decide, no, this is really good, or
Mm.
actually it's better here, and
Yeah.
it's allowing that.
Yeah.
And it's hard, I guess, when you've got a script, it's quite easy. Everyone's role is very clear, and often that is very one director leading. With the devised process, there's often lots of people involved.
Mm.
And as you said earlier, some people are quieter.
Mm.
How do you ensure that everyone's involved and all the different voices come through?
By setting the tasks. So if it's the example we gave earlier of, okay, you two go and work on a scene that might be this, you go and work by yourself on a monologue for Cassandra. And that way, of course, that person's voice is going to come through. And then once that piece of work has been shared, you make sure you honor it, because someone has worked very hard to get there. So the last thing you do is, no, not really. Even if you think it's rubbish, at least give it the time of day, and um, and thereby build up that person's potential for where they can go next. Um, and look for what's good in it.
Mm.
There's always something. Um, and then maybe that person can go and take, or someone else can take that little nugget and turn it into something else. So I think it's just knowing that everyone is there as an author. Everyone's there because you want them to be there. Yeah.
I actually think that's quite clever because we think when we're doing group work, we have to stay as a group and
No.
always be a group.
No.
And actually, in terms of time frames, in terms of creating theatre that's interesting and not always the same, people going off and doing individuals or little duos actually means you're generating more material, which for time spent is great, but also it does allow those different voices to come through.
Absolutely. If you do the whole group, it's going to be, the football captain who's always the football captain. Whereas if you put the football captain with the quiet person who likes to sew, you'll get a new energy, and it frees up other people to do other things.
And try and experimenting with those dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, what are the interesting combinations? And don't put people together who are too similar. Dramatic energy comes from conflict and difference.
And so we're talking about a lot of actors in this, but actually, do we collaborate with other people?
Oh, yes, we do. Movement directors, wonderful people to have in rehearsal rooms. People who work with, well, it's not necessarily dance, but how the body can do something expressive. Musicians, certainly a composer, uh, video artists, very often, costume designers, stroke set designers. And sometimes that emerges in our work more often than not. Actually, the set tends to emerge from what's going on, but the costuming, I think, can be very, very important. And certainly, video and projection we use in a lot of shows, not all of them, but if it's appropriate, then that's again someone's task, and the dialogue with those people. Again, this is part of my job, is to coordinate between them, but very often they are actually in the room with the actors, and that again gives us a different energy, doesn't it?
And again, I guess in terms of student devised work, it's what are the skills of your group? If you've got someone who's fantastic at movement, let them lead on that. If
Yeah.
someone who's great at music, or someone who's an artist on the side, use all those skills.
Yes, absolutely. And if someone is great at music and doesn't want to act, that's fine. They can do the music, and that's a really valuable use of that person's talents and interests.
So often when you're in the process, and it feels great because you're having fun, you're being playful, but and you're enjoying what you're doing, but how do you ensure what you're doing is good and relevant for an audience, or actually making a great play? How do you turn something into sort of just being playful exercises into a piece of good theatre?
Well, just because something is playful doesn't mean it isn't serious. Play. We're having this conversation not very long after the World Cup. Football is a game. It is also probably the most serious thing on the planet. People invest more time, energy, and money in it than anything else. They're very, very serious about play. And that's because it's in the nature of humanity to be serious about play. And I think it's just having both those eyes at the same time, that you're being playful because that's productive, but what you're being playful with is significant material. Even if it's comedy, it's significant because it needs to be meaningful, and you just need to keep filtering that. I think again the role of the director is very important there. And if everything's breaking down into just, oh, we'll all be just stupid and it'll be great, no, we'll probably think it's great, but no one's going to want to watch that. And just having that outside eye in the room who is able to put the brake on something and say, actually, we're all loving this, but it's only us who will love it. That's really useful. And you can't do that if you're inside it. You have to have someone who's just standing back and watching.
And how can students do that if they've got to create a piece on their own without a director? What do you think they could do to ensure?
Well, again, it's division of labour. If you two are doing this scene, you two are doing that scene, I'll be the director. I'll just watch. Doesn't mean the director's telling people what to do. The whole conversation has been about we don't do that.
Yeah.
But it does mean you're saying, actually, this could be this. This could be this thing instead. Let's fiddle around with it in that way.
So, how much do you know? Because you've said you do this period of research. How much do you know what you want before you start rehearsing and devising?
Not very much. The hunch grows, but, well, for example, with The Great Experiment, I knew that it was going to be about the indentured labour migrations, which happened after the abolition of slavery in the British Empire, which, is a very specific subject, but it's also quite a big one. And I also thought that it had to be about why that was important to talk about now and why it was meaningful. And I thought, therefore, it would also probably be about the actors rehearsing it. But that was as much as I had, and I held the last bit back for a long time because it was important for everyone to get into the historical material before we started thinking, well, what does that mean for us? And it happened actually very organically and easily. Not easily. It was actually very difficult, but organically and truthfully. And I wasn't doing much to make it happen. uh, and that's when you know you're onto something, is if the actors go the way you're thinking they might without you making them.
So maybe having not too many set ideas at the very beginning of the process is helpful.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, if you know what you want, you're not devising, are you?
Exactly.
It's just another version of something scripted. It just happens not to have been written down.
And has anything particularly surprised you in rehearsals over the
Well,
years?
every day. Yeah, I mean, that's the joy of it, isn't it? Things happen all the time, which you think, oh, I never expected that. I remember uh, towards the end of the Great Experiment, the first run through. So, the post-it notes were on the wall, but we hadn't done them in order on the stage. And very near the end, there was a scene where the sort of realistic what's happening in the rehearsal room acting was going on, and it starts going into a repetition. And it was always great for the audience because they recognized that the scene was starting to repeat, and then it became more and more stylized. But the post-it note after that was that an indentured man returns home to India. And I was sitting watching it, and I was enjoying the repetition of the scene, and I was enjoying how it turned into movement and listening to the music. And then suddenly Toby, who had been at the center of all of that, was standing in the corner of the stage as the indentured man coming home, and the scene was shifting all around him, and it was incredibly moving, and not I'd not seen it before. And something actually occurred in that moment just by the fact that those two scenes were next to each other, which was a new truth.
Changing the subject a bit,
Mm-hmm.
which we haven't actually touched on. We've talked about the different people in a room. Actually, a lot
Yeah.
of what Border Crossings does is we're quite playful with language and
Yes.
cultures.
Yes.
And actually, often students have languages they use at home.
Mm.
How would you? And we think we have to do everything in English because that's our audience. How can we involve that in our devising process of the different languages that people may or may not have?
It varies, but it depends how many people are in the room who speak each one. If there's only one person in the room who speaks Bulgarian, there might be a scene in which there is only one person who speaks Bulgarian, and everyone else has to try and understand that person, or deliberately doesn't understand that person. That can be as simple as a newly arrived person who doesn't speak English is in a shop, and just see where that might or might not take you. On the other hand, if there are two people who speak Bulgarian, then you could have a scene in which someone translates, and that may or may not, well, there's a power dynamic in it. We're just starting to think about a piece which we might make over several years, where there would be a character who's had to come to a country for surgery, but doesn't speak the language of that country, and has to have a dialogue with the surgeon, and actually the dialogue becomes quite complex. There's going to need to be some sort of intermediary. Doesn't even have to be a person, because nowadays these things can be done with technology, but we will just explore that. And the students can do the same thing. The hardest thing is if everyone knows English, because you will hear things that you do understand. The most difficult thing is improvising that you don't understand something when you do. It's really hard to do.
And so we've been developing resources because we're celebrating our 30th birthday. So we've got lots of productions available for students to watch. And again, we also did a project where students took our work and created their own shorts. So we would invite you to do the same. So again, if students are interested in being playful with languages, we've got a piece called Consumed, and we had students who responded to that in a completely different way. Do you want to just explain a little bit about that?
Well, yes, Consumed was a piece we made with exactly that triangle,
Exactly.
actually, and there were only 3 actors in it, one of whom spoke no English, one of whom spoke no Chinese, and one of whom spoke both. But it also made use of technological forms of translation and many, many other things. And the students made a piece called Google Translate, which was about two young people communicating by WhatsApp or something online.
She was called Google
Yeah,
Translate.
she was called Google Translate, and so there was a character who was the embodiment of the technology of Google Translate, and she would translate between them, um, and it allowed them to bring out a lot of humour and also genuine tensions around, because they want to meet in person, but even though they're setting up this sort of lovely relationship online, there are actually barriers to them meeting in person, and that became really, really interesting. So how we talk to each other, I think, became the subject. It's really good.
And is there any other pieces you think are worth students exploring to devise their own work out of our catalogue?
That's loads. Yes. Well, obviously, the Great Experiment is one I'm very proud of. I think people might find The Mouth of the Gods very, very interesting, because that's a music theatre piece, so it was done in a very different way, but very relevant to a lot of the things we've been talking about. Consumed, yes. Then even some of the scripted pieces, like The Dilemma of a Ghost, I think speaks to a lot of questions around who we are in our more diverse societies, how we're living with the history which made those diverse societies, and there are hunches to be gained from those sorts of pieces.
Do you have a fave production?
Fave?
Or something you're particularly proud of after 30 years' work of Border Crossings?
No, it's all rubbish. Well, usually I react quite intensely against anything I've just done, and I did sort of a bit against Suppliants of Syria, but we're hoping to do it again, and I'm starting to think, therefore, that I must love it, and so that I am very fond of that play, because I think there's something it does with the reality of refugee lives and the fictionalization of young people's lives in Britain right now, which is very dynamic and exciting and gives us much bigger possibilities. But I think probably the all-time favourite is probably The Great Experiment.
Very close to your heart.
Yes, it is.
So do you have any final words of encouragement or support for young theatre makers of the future?
Stay playful and have a lovely time, and don't forget the play is serious.